In the year 247 PC, Talamh died slowly. Not in the clean way of borders shifting on maps or kings being dragged from thrones, but in the creeping way rot finds a seam and worries it open, day by day, until even sacred stone feels sick beneath the foot. The Celts had always believed their homeland could endure anything: storms, hunger, clan feuds, even the strange tides of Nexu that sometimes stirred the land like a breathing animal. But the dawn was different. It was the creation of Celene Maris, or at least she was its principal architect. Her path toward fanaticism began after her infamous encounter with the pirate Longbeard in 124 PC. During that clash, Longbeard admitted, whether out of cruelty or honesty, that he had killed her brother. From that moment, Celene Maris devoted herself to hunting pirates in the name of justice. After Maris's death, the organization she founded lost its restraint. The Dawn ceased to be hunters of criminals and became collectors of power. Justice became doctrine. Doctrine became law. Law became fire. The Celts resisted first in the old ways. They gathered at stone circles and sang the names of their ancestors into the wind. They painted warding spirals on doorways and buried iron nails in thresholds. Those with Nexu worked careful rites, root and heart alignments, coaxing vines into living barriers, wind and water shaping mist shields around villages. The dawn walked through it all like smoke through fingers. They came cloaked in gray and crimson, preaching purity and peace. They spoke like priests but moved like soldiers. When the Celts fought, the dawn called it savagery. When the Celts begged, the dawn called it weakness. When the Celts tried neutrality, the dawn called it guilt. The first town burned after refusing a tribunal. The second burned after accepting one. After that, the clans understood. There was no correct answer. So they chose the only thing still wholly theirs. They left. Wagons creaked under the weight of family bones. Women bit cloth to keep from sobbing loud enough to wake children. Warriors who had sworn to die on Talamh turned their backs because dying was easy. Living meant carrying those who could not fight. The sea waited like an indifferent god. They carved ships from what timber remained, bartered for sailcloth with traders brave or desperate enough to approach Talamh's haunted coast. The strongest Nexu users hollowed themselves, reinforcing hulls and shaping currents, bleeding from the nose, eyes gone glassy. When the fleet finally pushed off, the cliffs of Talamh looked like the ribs of something enormous and dead. The journey felt like punishment. Storms harried them. Some nights the sea went unnaturally still, Nexu users waking gasping, insisting something beneath the hulls was listening. They lost ships to reefs, sickness, madness. They lost people to grief heavy enough to pull them overboard. Still, they continued, because sailors whispered of a wild coast, the Flagler Coast, where the land felt young and unclaimed. When the fog parted, salvation did not greet them. Trial did. Jagged rocks, towering palms, forest pressed thick as a fortress. No hearth smoke, no cairns, just wilderness, vast and silent. The first ship scraped sand with a groan like a dying animal. They made camp anyway, and on that shore, with nothing but grief and stubborn breath, the story of Dóchas Nua began. The first weeks on the Flagler Coast were not shaped by speeches or grand plans. They were shaped by blisters. The Celts of Talamh learned quickly that this land did not give itself away. The soil was rich, yes, but tangled with roots that fought every spade. The forest offered timber, but each tree seemed to take its own price. Sap that burned skin, thorns that tore cloth, insects that bit until blood ran in thin lines down wrists. And always the wilderness watched. The villagers from the surrounding towns did not approach as a crowd after that first handshake. They came in pairs or alone, appearing at the edge of camp like wary shadows, quiet, watchful, but present. They offered guidance in small ways that carried enormous weight, which berries would kill and which would heal, where the water ran sweet instead of brackish, what tracks meant storm-driven wildlife, and what tracks meant something far worse. The Celts, in return, offered metal needles, fish hooks and blades, plain ironwork, practical and sharp, enough to make even hardened coastal hands pause and look twice. Respect grew the way moss grows, slow, quiet, impossible to stop once it took hold. Children were the first to forget the invisible line between us and them. They chased each other through tall grasses, traded carved toys and salt-polished shells. and invented games that required no shared language beyond laughter. When the adults watched them, something softened in their chests, something that had been clenched tight since Talamh, as if their bodies had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without bracing for the next loss. The Celts began building because there was no other option. They chose a clearing near a freshwater bend, where the forest opened just enough for light to fall warm. They raised the first homes in the Celtic fashion, rounded frames, thatched roofs, hearthstones placed with ritual care. The villagers showed them how to seal the thatch against the coast's heavy rains, how to lay stones so the ground's damp wouldn't seep into bones during sleep. In exchange, Celtic artisans taught them how to temper iron in the Celtic way, to strengthen spearheads so they wouldn't warp. Work became a shared language, and in shared work, trust found its footing. When the first harvest came, small, stubborn rows of grain and root vegetables coaxed from foreign earth, the entire settlement celebrated as if they'd won a war. They roasted fish over open flame, brewed bitter leaf tea the villagers swore would ward sickness, and filled the air with music that braided Celtic drums with coastal flutes. It was during that first festival that the name was chosen. Dóchas Nua, New Hope, not because hope was easy, but because it was necessary. They carved the name into a central stone in the clearing, a marker that said, "We are here. We are still alive. We will not be erased." Seasons turned. Houses multiplied. Paths formed between them, packed down by hundreds of feet. A market square began as nothing more than blankets on the ground, but it grew. Wooden stalls, a shared well, a central fire pit where disputes were settled and stories traded, and still, the world did not leave them in peace. The Flagler Coast was a crossroads for more than migrating villagers and city folk and desperate refugees. Ships passed offshore, merchant vessels fat with cargo, and leaner silhouettes that hugged the horizon like sharks. Pirates. At first, they were only rumors, a crimson sail glimpsed in fog, a ship that vanished after a scream carried across water. Some Celts argued they should fortify and prepare for attack. The village elders argued that pirates were like storms. Sometimes you survive by standing strong, and sometimes by understanding the wind. The debate ended when a pirate sloop anchored boldly within sight of shore. Its sails were dark, its hull scarred. Men moved across its deck with the loose confidence of those who feared no law. The village fell silent. Mothers pulled children close. Hands hovered near hidden knives. Then an envoy rowed toward shore, one man, alone, carrying no weapon visible. His hair was braided with colored thread, his grin bright as a threat. He introduced himself as Kid Calico. He spoke as if he owned the sea, as if the world was a tavern he could swagger through without paying. Yet his eyes, sharp, calculating, missed nothing. He watched the settlement, the mix of Celtic and village styles, the iron tools, the guarded stairs. "You built something worth taking," he said lightly, as if commenting on the weather. The Celtic chieftain did not flinch. "Then take it," he replied, voice steady. "And you will be taking from people who have lost everything once already. We will not lose again quietly." Kid Calico's grin widened, like he respected the spine in that answer. Noted, he did not attack. Instead, he offered a deal. The pirates needed safe harbor, a place to repair ships, gather provisions, treat wounds. In return, they offered protection. A pirate fleet's reputation was sometimes more valuable than an army's swords. Other raiders avoided waters claimed by certain captains, not out of morality, but out of fear of retaliation. Many in Dóchas Nua hated the idea. To ally with pirates felt like inviting darkness back into their rebuilt lives. But the elders, both Celtic and village, understood the difference between a monster and a necessity. They had fled the dawn, a force that cloaked brutality and righteousness. Pirates, at least, were honest about what they were. They did not pretend to be saints. So Dóchas Nua agreed, cautiously, begrudgingly, but with eyes open. The harbor was reinforced. A designated dock was built for unwelcome allies. Provisions were traded under watchful eyes. Agreements were sealed not with ink, but with witnessed oaths and iron tokens. And for a time, it worked. The sea lanes around Dóchas Nua grew safer. Traders began to stop, lured by the settlement's strange reputation, a place where Celtic refugees and coastal tribes lived together, guarded by pirates who should have burned it down. Trade blossomed, culture blended. The village became a living contradiction. Proof that survival sometimes required choosing the option that felt wrong to outsiders, but necessary to those living the consequences. For a while, Dóchas Nua thrived, and because nothing fragile is allowed to remain untested in the world, the rumors began. The whispers started in places where truth was always diluted. Taverns along the Flagler Coast passed stories between mugs of bitter ale. The Celts had become pirate pets. A few villages and towns had sold their land for coin. Dóchas Nua was a den of raiders hiding behind the mask of unity. Merchants muttered that ships had vanished near those waters, swallowed by the sea, some said with a nervous laugh. Most people dismissed it as coastal gossip, the kind that grew teeth simply because boredom demanded it. But the Dawn did not dismiss anything. When the Dawn heard of an alliance between refugees and pirates, their leaders did not see nuance. They saw infection, an unholy harbor, a corrupted settlement, a place where compromise with criminals was allowed to breathe. So they sent scouts, not emissaries, not negotiators, scouts. They moved like ghosts through the coast fog, slipping between pines, crawling over rooftops under moonless skies. In Dóchas Nua, they watched the docks, listened in market stalls, counted how many pirate ships came and went. What they found did not match the tavern tales exactly. Yes, coin exchanged hands. Yes, pirate crews unloaded crates under torchlight. But they also saw pirates repairing fishermen's boats without payment, simply because they'd broken them in a storm. They saw village healers trading herbs with pirate medics. They saw Celtic guards turning pirates away from the inner village when liquor made them loud. It was not a den of evil. It was a settlement balancing on the edge of necessity. To the Dawn, balance was just another word for weakness. The scouts returned with no written report, only the hard gleam in their eyes. They spoke of pirates in the harbor and mixed bloodlines around the same fire. They spoke of Dóchas Nua as a place where law had been replaced by bargain. The Dawn's leaders offered one answer: erase the infection. They chose their moment carefully. The scouts had confirmed that several pirate ships were away raiding or trading. The Dawn wanted the village exposed, vulnerable, and, most importantly, unable to call its seaborne allies quickly. They struck at dawn, when gulls had not yet begun their first harsh cries. Warriors poured from the tree line in gray and crimson, blades already wet with oil. They did not carry banners. They did not announce themselves. They moved like a verdict. The first roof went up in flames before a single alarm was shouted. Fire spread fast through thatch, leaping from house to house like a starving animal. Smoke rolled through streets and into lungs. People ran, half-dressed, dragging children and elderly relatives, tripping over fallen beams. The Dawn called it justice. A Celtic elder tried to reach the central stone, the one carved with Dóchas Nua, as if touching the name might anchor reality. A Dawn soldier cut him down before his fingertips could brush it. A mother screamed as flames took her roof. She begged for mercy. A Dawn warrior's boot crushed her hand into the dirt, and his blade ended the begging. They were not laughing. They were not wild. That was the horror of it. They were calm. They believed. And belief could be as lethal as any monster. The village fought back with whatever it had: axes meant for wood, kitchen knives, hunting spears. A handful of Nexu users called water to smother flames, called wind to shove smoke away from children, called root to yank thorn vines from the earth and lash Dawn soldiers' ankles. But panic makes magic clumsy. The Dawn moved with training and purpose. Their tactics were brutal but efficient. Cut off escape routes, drive villagers toward the center, burn the edges last so no one could flee into forest cover. Dóchas Nua began to die the way Talamh had, under the hand of something claiming righteousness. Then the sea changed. A hush rolled across the shore, unnatural and heavy. Waves slowed as if listening. Even the Dawn soldiers glanced toward the horizon, uneasy. Fog parted. Black sails emerged like wings unfurling. The Blue Death. The pirate ship was not merely large, it was imposing, an omen made of wood and iron. Its hull looked like it had survived being chewed by storms and spat back out. The air around it seemed colder, as if the sea itself leaned toward it in reverence. And at its bow stood Captain Michael B. Bones. He stepped onto the sand like a phantom given weight, tall, blue-eyed, long coat snapping in the salt wind. Sea glass buttons caught the first sunlight like cursed jewels. The Dawn had planned for villagers. They had not planned for the sea answering by sending one of the most feared pirates. Captain Bones raised his palm, fingers loose, almost lazy. The ocean obeyed. A wall of water rose offshore, impossible in height, a moving cliff that shadowed the beach. With a small twist of his wrist, the wave crashed inward, roaring over the shallows and slamming into the hidden escape boats the Dawn had stashed beneath the southern cliffs. Wood splintered. Ropes snapped. The Dawn's path to retreat drowned in foaming water. The Dawn was trapped. Captain Bones did not shout. He did not need to. His crew poured from smaller boats, like a tide of blades and grim faces. Steel flashed. Water coiled around ankles and wrists. Nexu shaped like living serpents, yanking Dawn warriors off balance, dragging them screaming into surf. What followed was not a battle so much as judgment meeting judgment. The Dawn fought viciously, but the pirates fought like people who'd survived every kind of death and grown bored of fearing it. In 20 minutes, perhaps less, the Dawn's assault crumbled into slaughter along the sand. When the last Dawn warrior fell, the village was not merely burned. It was soaked. Smoke hissed into steam. Ash plastered itself into mud. Bodies lay in heaps, Dawn and villager alike, tangled beneath shattered beams. The pirates stood amid it, breathing hard. The villagers watched them with terror in their eyes, because how could anyone trust saviors who wore the faces of monsters? Then, Captain Bones did something no one expected. He walked toward a sobbing girl clutching her mother's charred body. He knelt, slow and careful, as if afraid to startle her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle, steady. "It's over," he murmured, voice low enough that only she and the wind caught it. His crew lowered their weapons, and instead of looting, they began to dig graves. Right there, in the ruined sand, the pirates mourned with the villagers. Dóchas Nua did not know what to do with that kind of contradiction, but it remembered. It remembered who brought the fire and who brought the water. The rebuilding of Dóchas Nua began with silence. Not the peaceful kind. No, this silence was raw, stunned, threaded with the crackle of dying embers and the occasional sob that slipped free when grief could no longer be held inside ribs. The pirates had drowned the flames, but they had not drowned what the dawn had done. They could not. Graves became the first new architecture. The pirates worked without being asked. They dug in sand until their hands blistered. They carried bodies, villagers first, then their own, then even the Dawn's fallen. Because Captain Bones insisted the dead did not deserve to be left for gulls. Some villagers hated that mercy. Others were too exhausted to argue. Most simply watched, as if afraid to blink and discover this was a dream that would vanish. When the graves were lined and stones placed, the elders performed rites with salt and smoke. Celtic elders followed with prayers and woven cords laid across the markers. Pirates, men and women who should have mocked any ritual, stood with heads bowed, hats held to chests. A scarred pirate lit incense for the dead each night, setting the smoke so it curled toward the stars like a question. Children began to approach pirates cautiously after that. The first offering was an apple, small and bruised. A pirate with a beard braided in 3 colors took it like it was treasure, winked, and handed the child a carved wooden shark in return. That trade, fruit for toy, spread through the village like a crack in fear. Soon children were asking pirates to teach them knots. Soon pirates were sitting on half-burned docks and letting little hands braid their hair. Soon laughter returned in short bursts, surprised to find itself alive. The alliance shifted. Before the Dawn's attack, the pact had been practical, harbor for protection. Now it became something else. Shared sorrow made stronger glue than coin. More pirate ships came, not to raid but to rebuild. Their cargo holds carried timber and nails, cloth and grain. The pirates moved through Dóchas Nua like workers, not conquerors. They hammered beams into place. They repaired fishing boats. They helped raise new roofs, thicker and less flammable than before. Other villages and towns contributed knowledge of the land, where clay could be dug, where reeds grew for stronger weaving, what trees resisted rot. The Celts contributed ironwork, structure, stubborn determination. Together, they remade the village in a way it had never been before. Not just a refuge, but a fortress of community. They built memorials openly, stones etched with names, simple markers, no grand statues, just proof that the lost were remembered, and that the living refused to pretend the scars were not there. Captain Bones visited those stones often, usually at dusk. He would stand in silence, coats stirring in sea wind, sea glass buttons catching the last light. Sometimes he placed a shell at the base of a marker, sometimes a coin, sometimes nothing at all, as if presence was the only offering he trusted. The rumor of what happened spread beyond Flagler Coast. Travelers carried it like wildfire. A village burned by the dawn, saved by pirates. A settlement where villagers, Celts, and sea raiders rebuilt together. People scoffed, because the world liked simple stories, heroes in white, villains in black. Dóchas Nua refused simplicity. Its market returned first, then grew larger than it had been. Traders arrived with cautious curiosity, eyes wide as they watched pirates haggling over bread like ordinary men. Stalls filled with blended craftsmanship, tribal beadwork woven into Celtic leather, pirate iron cutlasses reforged by Celtic smiths into farm tools, then reforged again into ceremonial blades for the settlement's guardians. Healers traded knowledge, Celtic herbalists learning coastal plant lore, countrymen from all over Flagler Coast learning iron needle stitching, pirate medics teaching battlefield techniques that save lives during childbirth and accidents alike. Festivals returned too, but they were different now. Bonfires were smaller, controlled, watched carefully, because fire carried trauma. Songs carried new verses, ones that spoke of water and ash, of betrayal and survival, of the truth that salvation might come from the hand you once feared. And beneath all of it, one question lingered like smoke that never fully cleared. Why had the Dawn's goals turned so drastically? Because pirate alliance was not enough, not for that level of rage. The answer came in fragments, captured whispers, stolen notes, intercepted travelers. The Dawn had not simply heard rumors. They had chosen Dóchas Nua as an example, a message to every place that might consider compromise, a warning that any blending of pure and impure would be cleansed. That kind of ideology did not stop at one village. It kept marching. Dóchas Nua began to arm itself properly, not in the Dawn's way, no tribunals, no purges, no righteous slogans, but with vigilance, with organized watch rotations, with training circles where pirates taught sword work and the tribes taught tracking and forest stealth. Celtic Nexu users began practicing together, strengthening barrier techniques and water control, learning to defend without burning their souls out. It was during one such training day that a sleek, metal-hulled ship appeared in the harbor, different from any pirate vessel, different from any merchant craft. Its presence turned the sea uneasy, as if even the waves recognized authority. Whispers ran through Dóchas Nua faster than any messenger. The Nexu Council had come, and with them, House Pelias. The ship's hull was iron-sheathed, its lines clean and merciless. It did not rock with the casual swagger of pirate craft. It cut the water like a blade. The banner it flew was not bright, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that made even pirates straighten instinctively. The Nexu Council did not visit places lightly. Dóchas Nua gathered along the docks, rebuilt planks creaking beneath nervous feet. Celtic elders stood shoulder to shoulder with tribal elders. Pirates lined the pier too, hands near hilts, faces hard, not because they intended to attack, but because they did not trust councils and courts, and anything that smelled like righteous order. Captain Bones remained at the front, as if daring the world to call him monster to his face. Then Councilman Carlos of House Pelias disembarked. He was stout and sturdy, armor dark as storm clouds, as if it absorbed sunlight instead of reflecting it. His footsteps landed with the certainty of a man who expected ground to make room for him. His gaze swept over the gathered crowd without warmth. House Pelias had a reputation, aggressive, unapproachable, the kind of house that solved problems with steel first and questions later. Dóchas Nua's fear returned in an old, bitter flavor, but the real surprise came moments later. Kid Calico stepped down behind Carlos, casual as ever, grin in place, as if arriving on a council ship was no stranger than arriving at a tavern brawl. The village murmured, confused. Pirates shifted. Celtic elders stiffened, because Kid Calico had always been Kid Calico, a pirate name, a mask, a myth. Carlos stopped at the edge of the dock and raised a hand for silence. "We are not here to punish Dóchas Nua," he said, voice carrying like a hammer strike. "We are here to confirm what has already been proven on this shore. The Dawn has exceeded its authority. It has become corruption wearing virtue as a cloak." He let that sit, heavy as iron, and he gestured sharply toward Kid Calico. "And this man, has not been what most of you believe." Kid Calico's grin softened, just slightly. He stepped forward, eyes bright and calculating, and for the first time, he looked less like a rogue and more like someone carrying a burden he'd grown tired of pretending didn't exist. "My name is Connor Calamine," he said. The name landed like a stone thrown into still water. Some Celts recognized it from old lineages, whispered through bloodlines and half-forgotten songs. Some pirates stared, because Calamine sounded far too noble for a man who'd stolen half the coast blind. Connor continued, voice steady. "My mother's line runs through Neve Padaram and Liam Dagda, for she was their great-granddaughter." A sharper murmur rose at Dagda. Then Connor revealed the secret he'd carried like a blade hidden against his ribs. Shortly before Neve's death, she bore a baby girl, concealed, kept from the Dagda family, kept from Liam himself, hidden because a threat had hunted their bloodline. The village listened, stunned. Even Captain Bones' expression tightened, as if he disliked surprises that smelled like old conspiracies. Carlos interrupted with the bluntness of a warlord. "Connor Calamine is wed to my eldest daughter, Katrina Peleus." That revelation struck harder than the first. A pirate married into House Peleus. The dockside felt suddenly too small for how large this story had become. Carlos's next words made the truth snap into focus like a sword drawn from a sheath. Connor's piracy had been, at least in part, a cover, a covert mission. Under the dawn's rise and spread of corruption, House Peleus needed an agent who could move beyond law, beyond expectation, beyond council politics. So Connor became Kid Calico, and his not
Crew?
just pirates. House Peleus soldiers disguised as sea raiders, loyal to the mission. Dóchas Nua reeled. Some felt relief, proof that the pirates weren't only pirates. Others felt anger at being used as a stage for noble schemes. The pirates present looked insulted, because even real pirates hated being mistaken for someone else's pawns. Connor lifted his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "The pact with Dóchas Nua was real," he said, "not an act, not a trick. I saw what this place was becoming, and I chose it. I'm not asking you to forgive secrecy. I'm telling you why the council is here now." Carlos took over again, voice grim. "Because the Dawn came here thinking you were alone. They were wrong. Connor's actions created a door the council could finally step through without igniting a civil war across the coast." He described the confrontation that followed the Dawn's assault, how House Peleus forces and Connor's crew hunted Dawn remnants, captured key leaders and delivered them into council custody. How the Dawn's so-called righteous regime had been ripped open and revealed as what it was, a tyrannical machine fed by fear. The villagers listened, stunned at how close they had come to being wiped from history as acceptable collateral. Then Carlos did something unexpected for a man with his reputation. He bowed, short, sharp, but unmistakable, toward the Celtic and village elders. "Dóchas Nua will be recognized as a protected settlement under council oversight," he declared. "Not to control you, to ensure the Dawn cannot return to finish what they began." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some exhaled relief, some narrowed their eyes, wary of any protection that could become a leash. Connor stepped beside Carlos. "I'm staying," he said simply. "Not as Kid Calico, not as a mask, as myself." Captain Bones watched him with a long, unreadable look, like a storm considering whether to become rain or lightning. The council ship remained in harbor for days, its presence a warning to anyone who watched the coast for weakness. Investigators walked the burned sites, scribes recorded names for official memorial, healers brought supplies. Dóchas Nua stood at the edge of a new era. It had survived fire and water. Now it would have to survive politics. The years that followed did not feel like victory. Victory was too clean a word for a place rebuilt from ash. Dóchas Nua became, in time, a symbol, admired, envied, feared. Travelers came not only to trade, but to stare, as if the village were a miracle that might vanish if looked at too hard. Celts living beside coastal tribes, pirates walking the streets without being hunted, council authority present but not crushing. The Dawn's name became a curse in many mouths. Yet, even cursed things left echoes. The Dawn had broken the coast's trust in heroes. It had shown how quickly virtue could become violence. That lesson did not fade easily. Connor Calamine took on work that did not suit a man raised on masks and misdirection. He became a builder. Not of ships or schemes, but of governance. Flagler Coast beyond Dóchas Nua had been battered by economic collapse, trade disrupted, towns burned, or intimidated by influence greater. Then the dawn. Coastal routes unsafe. The council could enforce order, but order alone did not fill bellies. Connor proposed a structure that sounded impossible at first, a new Celtic government rooted in cooperation rather than conquest, shaped by the lessons of Talamh's fall and Dóchas Nua's survival. Representatives from all three cities, Celtic elders, village leaders, harbor captains, craftsmen, healers, voices that had never been placed at the same table before. The title given to Connor was old, reclaimed from Celtic tradition and reshaped for this new coast, Atlaor. Some called it a coronation. Connor refused that word. He insisted he was not a king. He was a man chosen to do the job no one else wanted, carry responsibility until it bruised. His leadership did not appear as proclamations from balconies. It appeared in roads. He organized labor crews, pirates, villagers, and tribes together, building safer routes between settlements and cities so goods could move without relying entirely on sea lanes. He encouraged shipyards to repair merchant vessels, not just pirate craft, because a stable economy required trade that wasn't soaked in fear. He invested in education in a way that surprised those who still saw him as a cutthroat and a grin. A schoolhouse was built in Dóchas Nua with stone walls and wide windows. It taught children letters, numbers, history. It also taught survival, tracking, sailing, herb lore. Ironwork. Nexu instruction was handled carefully, with council oversight to prevent reckless chakra depletion and the kind of uncontrolled manifestations that could ruin lives. Healthcare followed, small clinics at first, staffed by blended healers, tribal remedies alongside structured stitching, Celtic salves alongside pirate battlefield knowledge. The result was a medical network stronger than any single culture could have built alone. Foreign investment returned slowly, drawn by stability. Merchants who once avoided Flagler Coast began docking again. Markets expanded. Crime did not vanish. The world was never that kind, but it shifted. Petty theft replaced organized terror. Disputes were settled in councils rather than midnight raids. Dóchas Nua, once a gamble, became a blueprint. The Nexu Council remained involved, but not as tyrants. House Pelias acted as the hard edge, enforcing consequences on Dawn remnants and opportunistic raiders who thought the coast was still weak. Carlos Pelias never softened, not truly, but people learned his aggression had direction. It was aimed outward, at threats, not inward, at the innocent. Captain Bones remained a paradox. He did not become a saint, and no one asked him to, but he kept his ship, the Blue Death, near enough that the sea around Flagler Coast felt watched. Pirates under his influence began acting less like wolves and more like an unofficial naval force, still rough, still sharp, but guided by an understanding that if the coast fell, the memorial stones in Dóchas Nua remained the village's anchor. Every year, on the anniversary of the Dawn's assault, the village gathered at dusk. No large bonfires, only lanterns and sea glass candles. Names were read aloud, slow, steady, never rushed. Children who had not yet been born when the village burned listened with wide eyes. They were taught the truth. Not all monsters came from the sea. Not all heroes wore bright cloaks. Connor, as Atlaor, never let the story become propaganda. He refused to paint the pirates as purely noble or the council as flawless. He spoke openly of his own lies, his own masks. He insisted that the only reason Dóchas Nua survived was because people chose each other when it was easier to choose fear. When Connor eventually retired, it did not feel like an ending. His policies had taken roots. His alliances held. The systems he built were not dependent on one man's charisma, but on a network of shared responsibility. Dóchas Nua continued to flourish. Flagler Coast stabilized. Neighboring regions watched and, some reluctantly, copied pieces of what worked. Mixed councils, shared defense, trade rules that did not punish poverty into crime. Connor's name became legend in a way he never sought, not because he was perfect, because he was proof that people could be more complicated than their reputations, and because Dóchas Nua, New Hope, stood as living evidence that peace was never a craft. Built plank by plank, stone by stone, oath by imperfect oath, sometimes purchased with fire, sometimes defended with water. always held together by the stubborn choice